I'm here with Dr. Jay Bhattacharya from Stanford, one of the authors of the Great Barrington Declaration. And now we're going to be talking about Bill Gates. And here's what Bill Gates said about COVID in general and how it's affected people. Here's what he said.
I'm not sure that, this was an interesting case test of people's trust in their politicians or their health system. And, statistically, we didn't do as well as I would have expected. In fact, I'm cited as some, mastermind of some evil plot in many, many cases. So, no, I didn't expect any of that. In some ways, the politicization of, taking vaccines and helping protect other people.
So just to break this down, he started off by saying that we lost trust. The people don't trust us because of the way we handled COVID. Is that how you interpreted that, what he said?
That's exactly what he said. You know what? I agree with that.
I agree with that too. I
100%.
wonder why do you think you lost that trust, Bill? He doesn't say why.
Just take the vaccines. Vaccines are a fantastic case study in this, right? So you have the vaccine comes out in December 2020. The very first thing that starts happening is like, who should get it first? Remember all the fight?
Yes.
And like I started seeing like young people on Facebook, because I'm old, I'm on Facebook. So they're doing these pictures of like bragging about getting the vaccine when it should have been going to like 85-year-olds. My mom should have got it first. My mom lives in LA County. She didn't get it until March 2021. And I'm seeing pictures of young people bragging about getting the vaccines. Almost immediately it was, and the politicized even before, right? Before the election, you had like prominent Democrats like Kamala Harris saying, I'm never going to take a Trump vaccine.
That's right.
So you have this, and then Trump loses the election, and then people like bragging about the vaccine taking and we delay giving it to older people as a result of this like weird politicization that already happened. The vaccine then, like most old people are offered it by March, April 2021, and all of a sudden there's this like goal of 80% of the people have to get it. And how come 80% of the people aren't taking it? Why is there's all this like worry among public health people. And then they turn to vaccine mandates. They start saying, you're good. If you don't take it, you're going to lose your job. If you don't take it, you can't take your kid to the public library. If you can't take it, your kid can't go if your kid doesn't take it, he can't go on a camping trip or whatever. And they take this. They take this thing, which could have just been like, talk to your doctor. If it's right for you, you should take it, and turn it into this like mechanism of like political control, like social control. And they're surprised that they lost faith, the public lost faith in them. Like if I was forced to lose my job over this vaccine, I would lose my faith in public. I lost my faith in public health in 2020, by the way. That's another thing. But because they failed to protect older people in 2020. They closed schools when they shouldn't have. They didn't follow the science. Bill Gates is right. People lost faith in public health, but that's because public health was utterly failed during the pandemic to be transparent in decision making, to reflect the values of the people that they're supposed to give advice about. They failed to follow basic science in decision making. And they used their power, their muscle, to destroy the lives of children, of countless working class people, of the poor. Public health. I mean, I don't even know what the right word is. Like, sometimes I've said this is the biggest peacetime public health disaster in history, but this was a self-inflicted disaster, not COVID. COVID was bad, but the public health response was an unmitigated failure.
And they still have, gag orders on people like me to be able to speak freely about it. I still can't do that. So let's go back to so he just admits that the public health system failed because they lost trust of the American people through the way they handled COVID. But he doesn't like point the fingers at anybody, and he doesn't say what they did wrong or why, but he immediately pivots, and watch how he pivots.
Taking vaccines and helping protect other people. you could almost say that's a step backwards. I hope vaccine acceptance for other diseases like measles is not reduced by this. But,
So he's now saying, well, I hope that people don't get afraid of vaccines now because of the way we handle this. He's literally saying this.
I mean, I actually wrote an article with Martin Kulldorff in I think April and May 2021 saying something similar. When we were warning against, this is in the Wall Street Journal, we warned against vaccine mandates, saying like people are going to distrust public health. And as a consequence, they're going to distrust even effective public health measures. I mean, I think the measles vaccine is a really important vaccine, Jimmy. It's really terrible that people don't trust public health enough to take what am I supposed to say to someone that says, Jay, you come from public health, why should I believe you? I don't have an answer to that question. And I can show them data to try to convince them. But the point is that it was utterly predictable. As soon as they started using, you even heard it in this clip. He says, you take the vaccine to protect other people. Well, the vaccine doesn't stop you from getting the disease and spreading it. It just doesn't. So the vaccine, if it provides protection for other people, it's very minimal. Basically none. After a couple of months, and what, you're going to not be around any other people except the vaccinated? Even then you're going to get COVID and it'll spread. So he's spreading misinformation in that clip.
Yes, he is actually.
So you have and he is a big funder of scientists. I mean, his Gates Foundation funds a very large number of the scientists that were very much in favor of lockdowns and the vaccine mandates and so on. That he's surprised that people distrust him. I mean, he was a prominent figure. He was on Meet the Press or whatever a whole bunch of times. He's the face of what science is doing for the pandemic, and he's surprised that people don't trust him. He's spreading misinformation about the vaccines. He was in favor of these mandates, and he's surprised that when people's lives were harmed by the lockdowns, by the school closures, by the vaccine mandates, that people turn around and say, "Look, I don't trust you anymore." I'm shocked by the naivete. It was utterly predictable.
Okay.
They should have just allowed debate to happen, and then they would have been corrected.
They couldn't chance it. They couldn't chance having an honest debate, which is why they didn't have an honest debate about ivermectin, and they still won't tell you about vitamin D3. They still won't tell you about zinc. They never mentioned losing weight or getting in shape. And now I just saw a study that said any amount of exercise during COVID helped you fight and battle COVID. Any amount. So now they're all agreeing Joe Rogan was right. Turns out Joe Rogan was right. But let's go back and listen to what this guy was. He's got some more to say.
A lot of people jumped in and took the vaccines, but a meaningful minority in most countries were led down a path of believing that not only were there rare side effects, but that the vaccine wasn't properly tested or was part of some evil conspiracy.
So again, he just said that they're being led down a path of believing that there's rare side effects to the vaccine. There are rare side. Everyone admits that
they said they're very rare. That's the whole point.
That the selling point was that the side effects were rare. So I also have to say again, so YouTube doesn't take my channel down, that this vaccine, while it doesn't stop transmission and contraction, which was the whole basis for ordering mandates, although it doesn't stop the transmission and contraction, it does slow the transmission and contraction. The vaccines are super safe and effective.
Just as good.
And that's just as good. That's just as good. So there he is. You're right. He can't stop himself from spewing misinformation. And he starts off that rant by saying people don't trust medical health. And by the way, why are we, and this is another thing people don't know, why are we listening to Bill Gates about medicine and pandemics? Has he spent his whole life working in medicine and pandemics? No, he's been a capitalist and monopolist. He doesn't even write his own code for his own company. And what does he do? He didn't even graduate college.
I would turn to him as an Epstein expert.
If I wanted some info on Epstein and what went over there, I'd ask Bill Gates for sure. But when it comes to vaccines, why do you think people, I know why, but I'd like to hear it from you, doctor. Why do people ask Bill Gates' opinion, a college dropout?
I mean, just to be fair to the guy, like he's funded a tremendous amount of science. Like he has this, did you know that like a large, like a huge fraction or some fraction of the World Health Organization's budget comes from the Gates Foundation?
Yes, that's not good. That's a bad thing. So you're congratulating him for corruption because that's all that is.
I mean, it could be good. I mean, like if you're really for like that, no. Okay.
Yeah, Dr. Evil is funding the World Health Organization. How could that possibly go wrong? What could possibly go wrong?
Why does some computer jerk? Why is it like
some guy who has financial interest in vaccines?
How many newspapers does he own?
Right, some guy who wants to control now the world's food. He's buying up all the farmland in America. This guy is a nefarious guy. Okay, and the fact that he's funding the WHO tells me why the WHO is saying some of the crazy shit that they've been saying.
I mean, it's a lot of this is hubris, right? So you have these people that are super rich, and he's not a dumb guy. I mean, he's very clearly and he's surrounded himself with like top scientists. But the problem is he doesn't know how to evaluate when the scientists are wrong.
That's right.
He doesn't know how to he doesn't have the he's not a public health guy. He doesn't have the instincts. But again, I don't even blame him. Like suppose there was a debate allowed. Suppose that he actually got to hear the other side. I bet you he hasn't heard the other side. He doesn't even know that there is another side. All these top scientists he funds tells him lockdowns, yes, vaccines are crucial for stopping transmission. We can get to herd immunity with the vaccines, and we absolutely have to do this. I mean, vaccine mandates. Everyone will take it up if we just do the vaccine mandates. There won't be any pushback. I mean, that's what he's probably hearing from his selected cabal of scientists, and he's just reflecting that.
So you didn't hear the story about when he convinced Oxford University not to make their vaccine available for free because of his intervention?
I heard that.
Yeah, he's not a good guy. This idea that Bill Gates is out there trying to help humanity, he's a maniacal manipulator and he's power hungry and he's bought off the media with $300 million, doesn't take much. And he finances the study, the science on a vaccine. He then finances the news coverage on it. He pays for the college where the reporters go to college, and then he gives money to the news agency like PBS so they can have a science report. Otherwise, they wouldn't have it. So it's all coming from him, and nobody knows this, and that's not good.
Yeah, I mean,
he's also selling home remote learning software, coincidentally, around the time.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, he has a big... Remember Common Core, that piece of shit everybody hates? That was him.
Uh-huh.
Then he wants to do this learning at home. There's all these synergies and opportunities.
Yes. The Nord Stream 2 pipeline broke up. That blew up. It's a big opportunity for Americans. LPG. So
I guess I have to say, my usual reaction to this kind of thing is it's fine. He can have his voice. But he not should have a monopoly of the airwaves of his voice, and he shouldn't be his voice shouldn't be amplified in a way that where opposing voices aren't allowed to be heard. You get knocked off YouTube, I get knocked off YouTube, but he doesn't.
Right?
Yeah.
And nor does Rachel Maddow when she says blatant lies about COVID and the vaccines.
Well, it is Microsoft NBC she's on.
It is, I know. So there's more of these. Let me just play a little bit more.
The idea of checking if people are vaccinated, if you have breakthrough infections, what's the point?
So that was him acknowledging that mandates are ridiculous because the vaccines, you still get infected.
I love breakthrough still. That's my favorite.
They call it breakthrough.
When I had breakthrough pain on Oxy.
Breakthrough infections, also known as infections. Breakthrough cases, also known as cases. They like to put that word breakthrough. And so this was he said that in March. That was in May of 2022. And I said, good to see that the self-appointed vaccines are Bill Gates finally catching up to pothead comedians. So it took him all the way until May of this year to say that. I've been saying that since I had Dr. Robert Malone on my show over a year and a half ago, and he explained to me that the vaccines were leaky and what that means. And so I've known that vaccine mandates were ridiculous for over a year and a half. It took Bill Gates to get to May of this year before he figured that out. And he says it in almost disguised ways, too. The way he says it's factual, but it's in a weird way, the way he said that. So he goes on. He's at the same conference. Here we go.
But, here we we're lucky. If this had been 10 years ago, some of these vaccine technologies did not exist. If it comes 10 years from now, we should have far, far better diagnostic technology. That is, be able to scale up every country within a month to diagnose their entire population. We should have much better therapeutics, some of which will be pathogen independent. And then, as we do come up with vaccines, we want vaccines that are infection blocking and long duration, which today, the vaccines have saved millions of lives, but they don't have much in the way of duration, and they're not good at infection blocking.
So that was in May. And by the way, the way he's talking, you would think he was a virologist or a scientist or doctor from Stanford University. Again, he's a college dropout monopolist who has no medical training whatsoever, yet the world turns to him, and we all know why the world turns to him, because he's bought the media, he's bought the WHO, and he's bought whichever frickin' stage he's sitting on talking. He's paid for this. That's why, because he's the richest guy in the world, and he can buy access to everywhere, and so people listen to him because they want his money. That's why we're listening to a college dropout talk like he's a virologist when he doesn't know his asshole from a hole in the ground when it comes to medicine.
I mean, can I just talk about the danger of what he just said? Right?
Yes.
Remember, we started the conversation with the lockdowns happened because of Zoom. The lockdowns happened because of the promise of vaccines. What he's promising is a future that whenever there's a respiratory virus pandemic, there's some chicken somewhere that spreads some virus to somebody. That we're going to lock down until the vaccines come. That's what he's promising. Mm-hmm. Basically, your life is not your own. At any point in time in the next coming decades, your life will be interrupted. Your kids' education will be interrupted. You won't be able to see your grandkids just because we have that technology. And people can tell themselves it's okay to lock down again because, which in a month the vaccine's coming. You can't shortcut it. Even this vaccine, we actually had a vaccine candidate, Jimmy, literally 2 days after the virus, and on January 3rd, we had a vaccine candidate of 2020. It still took months and months to run the trial, 9 months, and we only actually had 2 or 3 months of trial data of the vaccines when we said we approved them for the population at large. There's no shortcutting the running of a clinical trial. There's no in 1 month we'll know we have a good vaccine. That's just science fiction. That will never happen. You have to have time in order that tells you, this works for infection blocking for a long period of time. Well, you have to run that long period of time because what are you going to do? Predict what's going to happen a year from now based on what happened 2 days from now? No, you don't. It's not this is what he's talking about is science fiction. It's not going to happen. You have to actually still run the scientific experiments that tell you that this will be infection blocking. They'll tell you that it's safe. That'll tell you that it works for broad populations for a long period of time. And that takes time. There's no shortcut. You cannot lock down while that happens. I'm not against this technology. I mean, I'm in fact a big proponent of doing this testing, but you have to do the testing before you deploy it at scale. And you can't shut down civilization while you're waiting to do the testing. It's a vision of society that's really, really scary. It's not consistent with liberal democracy, that's for sure.
So that video I just showed you was from May of 2022. Here he is in September of 2022, and it's like he's lying. Let's listen.
Now, the pandemic was completely unexpected.
Now, first of all, that's not true. They ran what is it called? The Experiment 201, or for what was it? Go ahead.
Event 201.
Event 201, which was what they did was they ran an event like this happening, and they predicted what they would do, and they even could predict it would be a coronavirus that would be the one they were reacting to. Go ahead, you know more about it than me.
I mean, they've been doing this since the Bush administration. A lot of the infrastructure for these kind of war games for what happens to if there's a pandemic, thinking through the school closures, all this stuff. They've been planning about what to do just in case there's a big bioweapon release or something since the Bush administration. And it's like there's like some national defense overlay, which I've never been a part of. I don't really understand. But like there were people that were like, well, what would happen if there were an intentional release? They treated this like as if it were that.
Yes. Yes.
Was in the plan to say it definitely wasn't over.
Well, I mean, I don't know if intentional release. I don't think it's likely to an intentional release. But
I don't think that
whatever
either.
it was.
No, I think it was a leak. I don't think
you
it was
outsource
intentional.
everything everywhere. You're gonna have mistakes made.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think. Look, did you know that in 2021, November or December, in Taiwan, there was a high security lab in Taiwan doing tests on COVID, the COVID virus. And there was a lab leak in that lab in Taiwan in 2021. You study this virus, it's very difficult to contain it, even in high security environments. So it wouldn't surprise me if there's a lab. Anyway, but leave aside whatever it was. You look and see in let's say December of 2019, that there's this huge age gradient with children not being affected, or not being harmed really from getting infected, whereas and older people are getting really harmed. What do you do? Whatever was lab leak or whatever it is, what you do is you protect the vulnerable older people. That's the obvious thing to do. You adopt the century-long plan that worked in a century of respiratory virus pandemics. That's what should have happened. All of this Event 201, all of the war games that they did were nonsense. Like they were telling themselves they were learning how to deal with this when they didn't have the first inkling of what they were doing. They had no idea how society actually functions. That people actually rely on. Okay, just to give one small thing, you close a school. And you tell a single mom, your 7-year-old can't go to school. Now she has to decide whether to like stay home and like help her kid go on Zoom or go to work and leave him alone at home all day. Did somebody think about that?
No, they didn't. No, they didn't think about that. They didn't think about that kids who get their meals, their one meal a day they get at school. They didn't think about those kids. They didn't think about. They didn't give workers every
Why
other
we start now?
Every other country in the world, industrialized country who did this lockdown, gave their workers a salary. They didn't do that in the United States. It's the crazy, and I guess it was just to see if we would ever revolt, and it turns out we won't.
It's bad enough in the West. We did these lockdowns. If you look and talk to like epidemiologists who work in like poor countries, they were really influenced by Western epidemiologists. Uganda closed its schools for 2 years. 4.5 million children never came back to school, Jimmy. 4.5 million children. That's a lost generation. And this is even more heartbreaking. There's stories of child marriages because the parents couldn't, they're out of work because the sharp end of the supply chain disruption is some guy who earns like $10 a day working in Uganda, loses his job. He earns less than $2 a day. He can't afford to feed his daughter, and he sells his child into sexual slavery. That happened in Uganda. That happened in poor countries. We basically, with the Western lockdowns, consigned a generation of poor people to disaster, a lifetime of dire poverty or worse. We starved people. None of that went into these Event 201 kind of games. They told themselves stories about how much control they had over lives and livelihoods, and they knew nothing about how the way that world actually works.
So let's go back to Bill Gates.
Now, the pandemic was completely unexpected.
Okay, so starts off with a big lie. And he's got a million tells too, by the way. If you know anything about a guy lying, he's got a million. His hands always exaggerated gestures. Does this a lot. He's always lying. Okay, here we go.
Biggest tragedy is that it fragmented society, where certain sources, if they told you to wear a mask, that was the last thing you were going to do, or they told you, to get the vaccine, particularly to protect, reduce transmission to elderly people. They didn't comply.
So he just said in May, I showed you that video, he knew there was no point in mandates or travel cards, vaccine card, because of breakthrough infections. And now he's sitting there saying the big tragedy was how this tore people apart and how some people wouldn't. And he's doing the exact thing he's pretending to lament as he still passes on misinformation, saying that those people should get vaccinated because of their grandparents. He just said 6 months earlier, I just showed you the video, that doesn't make any sense.
I mean, it's not grounded in science. Like take masks as the perfect example of this, right? So remember early in the pandemic, we had so the Surgeon General of the United States get up and say, look, wear a cloth mask. It'll protect you against COVID. We told people that based on no good data at all. In fact, a decades of good randomized studies, the community masking does nothing to stop the transmission of the flu. We knew that. That's why in the early days they don't wear a mask, because there was no evidence it would work. Then we, on a dime, based on no data, said wear a cloth mask. How many older people wore a cloth mask, went out in public thinking they were protected when they weren't, got sick and died as a result? We in public health threw away our authority because we based our recommendations on nothing worthwhile, and it turned out to be wrong. The mask did not actually protect anybody really in the long run against the disease. Instead, it just divided society for nothing. You have these I see these videos of people chasing this person who's not wearing a mask down a grocery aisle for the crime of not wearing a mask, and then you have the vaccine transmission thing. You're not protecting older people by getting vaccinated. If I'm a young person, I go visit my older relative, and I'm unvaccinated. That doesn't mean I pose a larger risk just by that very fact to my grandma. That's just not true. If I'd had COVID and recovered, for instance, I probably pose less of a risk than just a purely vaccinated person who never had COVID and recovered. It's complicated, right? That kind of statement is just misleading. It's not based on actual scientific facts, and as a result, people don't trust public health anymore.
I feel like I should say a lot of nice things about the vaxxer. They're going to shut me down. That it does stop.
Do you have to say Bill Gates is good too?
Bill Gates is a good person, and he's going to be the godfather.
His weird blotchy skin looks great.
I think he's
Jimmy, I defended him, so it's all good. I think you're all good.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So let's see what else he says here.
And so it is a phenomena that held us back and hurt us in a pretty dramatic way.
Yes, the phenomena of people not trusting the health officials and doing what they said without question. That was a phenomena that hurt. So so now here, watch what he says here. Again, he's got the hands going, so you know he's lying. And so here we go.
It wasn't until early February when I was in a meeting that experts at the foundation said, there's no way, there's been too much travel without diagnosis for us to contain this.
What is all this, and what is here's my theory, and you correct me because you're the doctor and I'm a comedian. My theory is that he's lying about when they knew they couldn't contain the virus, and he's saying that they couldn't contain the virus because so many people traveled without diagnosis, and that's why they can't, not because of the idea that the vaccine doesn't stop transmission and contraction, but because people were traveling too much. That's the reason he's saying so, and he's doing all the hand gestures, which makes me think he's lying. What do you have to say about that?
So, Jimmy, I think I've seen that clip. So I think what he's referring to is February 2020.
So that's before we even had the vaccines.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So I think what he's saying there is that by February 2020, the disease was everywhere.
Okay.
He's saying that he learned that in February 2020. Now, when I saw the Chinese outbreak in December and then into January 2020, I knew the disease was everywhere because it was very obviously spreading by aerosol. Like, you remember that there was a Chinese study where they showed there was some restaurant, some guy outside the restaurant, and then all of a sudden somebody else outside the restaurant got it because there was some fan blowing. I saw that study. And I thought, okay, this is everywhere. And then there was an outbreak in Iran. There was an outbreak. Remember those early days, right? And so I'm like, there's no way to stop the disease from spreading. We just have to protect the people that are most vulnerable. You could see in the Chinese data and in the Diamond Princess data, there was older people that were most vulnerable. That was known even before February 2020. But the upshot, here's the thing about the upshot of what he just said. When the lockdowns arrived in March of 2020, if he knew that it was already everywhere, what was the lockdowns for? What were they for? They were based on a lie. In fact, I ran a study in April of 2020 checking antibody levels in LA County and Santa Clara County, California. And I found it was like 4% of LA County had already had COVID and recovered by early April 2020. And I got killed. I mean, just if you looked on Twitter, like I was like a villain for running this study. But it was true. The disease was 4%. Doesn't sound like a lot to you, but that's a big number when you're talking about an infectious disease that just came out. It was already everywhere. We had no way of controlling, the spread of it. The idea that the lockdowns would work those studies should have killed the lockdowns, because we don't actually have a technology to stop it from spread. We had a technology potentially of protecting nursing homes. Like I could understand isolating nursing homes in the early days and then rapidly developing therapeutics as they came up for older people and so on. But locking down, you remember the paddle border in Santa Monica
yes.
Pier?
And the cops went after him.
Yeah.
This guy's in the ocean doing paddle boarding, and the cops came and told him you can't paddle in the because he's a threat to who? What?
And
obedience. He's a threat to obedience.
To obedience. That's right.
And Bill Gates knows that that the disease already spread everywhere. February 2020.
And that's great catch. So I was wrong, but you were right. So that's why you're here. That's why I have you here.
Well, this is what debate and discussion is about. I got corrected by Bill Gates by you, so it's call it even.
Okay. So he's got more to say. Now here's the even more interesting part.
And then at that point, we didn't really understand the fatality rate. We didn't understand that it's a fairly low fatality rate and that it's a disease mainly of the elderly, kind of like flu is, although a bit different than that. So that.
Okay, so to me, that's a unbelievable game changer when he says that COVID, we didn't know it had a low fatality rate and it affected mostly the elderly, kind of like the flu, but a little different. Holy shit, he's saying the Great Barrington Declaration, that he's as if he just read it, right?
Yeah, so like I say, in fairness, in February 2020, I didn't know the mortality rate either. I thought that the disease was widespread, but I didn't know. Which is why I ran the study in April of 2020 to estimate how widespread it was, and in part to estimate that mortality rate. So by April of 2020, I knew that the mortality rate outside of nursing homes in the community in LA County and Santa Clara County was 0.2%. 99.8% survival. I also knew this age spread that there was this 1,000-fold difference in risk of mortality if you're older versus if you're younger, and that for children was a very low mortality disease. That I knew in April of 2020. In fact, that 1,000-fold difference you could tell from January 2020 from the data that came out of China. We knew that. My colleague Martin Kulldorff from Harvard, who wrote the Great Barrington Declaration with me, he wrote a piece in like late February, March 2020, just doing this calculation, saying there's this 1,000-fold difference. He couldn't get it published anywhere. He ended up
my God.
As a Harvard professor, prominent statistician and infectious disease guy, and he can't get that basic fact published. And so he ended up putting on his LinkedIn blog just to prove that he'd done this. We knew that earlier on. The Great Barrington Declaration, like I said, Jimmy, earlier, it was not original. It was the same. That was exactly the state that we should have adopted it in February 2020. We should have adopted it in January 2020. Protect older people. Don't try to stop the disease from spreading everywhere when it ends up harming the people you're trying to protect. Like you end up harming kids, you end up harming poor kids, poor people, you end up harming working class people. Small businesses, you just crush people for nothing, and the disease spread everywhere anyway.
Anyway, everybody. And again, in early 2021, Andy Slavitt, Biden's COVID director, said that because of Delta being so contagious, that it was likely everyone would become infected. And now it's Omicron, which is way more contagious. And so they're still pretending that you can somehow protect yourself to get from getting it, and you should. I'm sure you could protect yourself from getting it if you put on an N95 mask and sat in your closet for 10 years. You probably wouldn't get COVID. You can do that, but that's not how you want to live your life. So I have one more video I want to play, and I know you have to go, so I appreciate your time. So let me just play this video of him. I forgot what it is now. Let's see what it is.
Pick things you want to do that are big.
Oh, so this is when he went to visit Trump when Trump became president. And he said, he's telling Trump, this is his idea to Trump. He says, pick things that are big to do.
HIV vaccine, you could,
HIV, the first thing out of his mind is let's do a vaccine. Again, he's a computer guy. And all he's thinking about is vaccine. What is it about him and vaccines? He has an obsession with it. What's that?
He's invested in it?
Or maybe he's got money invested in it. Maybe that's it. That's all he talks about. So he goes to meet the president and he starts talking about vaccines. That is nuts to me when the head computer guy in the country goes to meet the president for the first time and immediately starts talking about vaccines. Holy shit, that's suspect. But watch what he says next.
Accelerate that, be associated with innovation. And then the second time I saw him was the March after that, so March 2017 in the White House. In both of those two meetings, he asked me if vaccines weren't a bad thing, because he was considering a commission to look into ill effects of vaccines. And somebody, his name is Robert Kennedy Jr., was advising him that vaccines were causing bad things. And I said, no, that's a dead end. That would be a bad thing. Don't do that.
Why did Trump ask Bill Gates?
Why would Trump ask Bill Gates about it? But he did, because Bill Gates brings up vaccines. And then Trump says, hey, why don't we have a commission to study the safety of vaccines? He says, that's a dead end. That would be a bad thing. Don't do that. Why would you? So what I would expect is that the committee that Trump set up to investigate vaccine safety would find out they're safe and effective, and that it would give people confidence going forward. Would it be a bad thing? Is he think that it's going to find out something different? What do you say, Doctor?
Okay, so let me try to start by, like, you asked why did Trump ask him? Because he's the Gates Foundation founder.
Oh, right, okay.
All this biologic sciences and so on, right? Epidemiologist. So I think that's why Trump asked him.
Okay.
Trump probably wants donations from him too, so that's why not ask him. But then the thing about the vaccine, vaccine safety research is vital. The federal government does it. The FDA does. I worked for years with the FDA's group that works on vaccine safety. If you want vaccine confidence in the public, you have to do that research. If you don't do that research, why would anyone trust you?
Safety's a dead end.
Safety's a dead end, Doctor. It's a bad thing.
I mean, it's crazy. Like, you have to have a group that's like, the thing that's about the FDA is, like, you have it's a lot of it is, like, pharma funded, but you have to have an independent group that says, look, I'm going to do the research to see if the thing that we approved is actually safe. So they can put black box warnings on things. There are actually, Jimmy, honestly, there are good, honest people at the FDA that do that for a living. I've worked with them. If you don't have that, then no one should trust the drugs that are on the market, the vaccines. You have to have a strong investment with a group that can say, look, here's what the scientific data is saying about. I'll give you an example. There's a virus, a vaccine called there's a virus called a rotavirus. It infects children, causes gut problems in children. There was a vaccine that was put on the market that rarely would cause something called intussusception, where, like, you have your gut and it would, like, fold in on itself like telescope. It's nasty, painful, really bad thing. The group that, not me, but like, so the FDA group that I work with found that there was that problem. And as a result, the vaccine got pulled from the market. We didn't know that the vaccine would cause this problem, but as soon as it was discovered, it got pulled from the market. The only way the American people are going to know that the vaccines and the drugs that are safe is if you have this vaccine safety research that's done routinely, that checks and pulls the thing and is honest when something's gone wrong. If you don't have that, why would you trust anything? And this is just the wrong advice that Gates is giving Trump. The right advice is let's do honest research. Let's have an independent group that looks at it and uses rigorous scientific methods that checks and even if the pharma companies are yelling loudly, no, don't pull this, you still pull it when there is a safety signal. So this is just the wrong advice.
Isn't there? I mean, I thought the whole point of you can't sue them was so that they didn't have to be afraid to check the safety of it, right? Is that the whole making them safe from lawsuits in the first place? Isn't that supposed to be tempered with constant safety checking?
I think this is like there's that 1986 law, right? That made vaccine manufacturers not have to face
not liable.
Right, suits. But I think the reasoning there was like, well, look, you're going to deploy some vaccine at scale. There's somebody that's going to get harmed, and I'm going to lose. My company's going to get destroyed. So in order to give me incentive to do it, I'm going to be shielded from the lawsuit. But you have to, fine, if you're going to do that, but you have to pair that with a few things. One is when somebody is harmed, you have to treat them with respect. You have to care for them. You have to compensate them. You have to have you can't just gaslight them and say, oh no, you weren't injured.
I told Jimmy to shut up and go away when he got injured.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Let's take a safe and effective vaccine. If there's rare injuries that happen, you have to treat that person who's injured with respect, and try to make good as best you can. You can't just pretend like it didn't happen. The second thing, if you're going to do that liability shield, is you have to have an independent group, because now the vaccine manufacturer has no incentive to check, right, whether it's safe. So you have to have a powerful independent check at the FDA, some regulator that checks and has the power to say, let's pull this vaccine. So what happened with the COVID vaccine is you had this liability shield, but you had all these vaccine injured people are gaslit. You're not really using the funds to compensate them. You don't, and the checks they've finally started to come. The FDA just put out a paper that found that for older people, the mRNA vaccines produce pulmonary embolism at low rates, but still it's there, right? They're starting to put out these safety studies, but they've come a year and a half late. They should have been doing these. They should have been working on this much more rapidly. You read the thing, it's they're still not coming to terms with the fact that they haven't treated this normal vaccines, where you would be doing this check with a power to pull the vaccine if for some groups it doesn't work, or for some groups that's not net beneficial. They approved the children's vaccine for 6-month-olds on the basis of again, antibody production. They did not demonstrate that it protected children in the randomized trials against death. They approved it without that. They approved just based on antibody production. They approved the BA.4/5 booster vaccine on the basis of 8 mice, not even any human data. I mean, I'm not saying necessarily that it's wrong. What I'm saying is that that's not sufficient to give confidence to the American people that they did the right thing.
Well, Dr. Jay Bhattacharya from Stanford, I appreciate you. Appreciate your leadership on the everything COVID. It's people like you that give me faith that we could actually do something good, and that something good might come out of this. Hopefully, is there anything good you think that will come out of this?
I think we need new leadership. I think eventually public health, if it's gonna be reformed, it has to come to terms with everything it did wrong here, and that lesson needs to get learned. That's my hope for what good might come out of this. But it's going to take a big concerted effort, and we have to keep talking, Jimmy, for that to happen. Definitely,
got to keep talking. Got to not shame questions and not silence people, and certainly don't discredit doctors, the top doctors in their fields. Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, thank you so much. I hope you come back sometime soon.
Thank you, Jimmy, for having me.
Everybody, we're doing live stand-up comedy in Los Angeles in January and February in Los Angeles. And then we're going to Tempe, Palm Springs, Milwaukee, Minneapolis, Nashville. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for all those tickets and become a premium member while you're there.